where you see the parallels is with other fundamentalists. I mean, I think, when I'm talking about the Milton Friedmans of the world, I'm talking about market fundamentalists who believe in a vision of society that looks wonderful in their mathematical models in the basement of the University of Chicago, but are one of these systems that actually need a monopoly on power in order to be realized, because it's all about balance, right? And any distortion is polluting the possibility of this balance, this promise of the perfectly balanced market. That's true for religious fundamentalists. It's true for Marxist fanatics. It can't countenance any other ideology that sets off the balance. Right. So it's those ideologies, I think, that are very dangerous in the moment of crisis, because they imagine the dislocation as a kind of a clean sheet, a blank slate, and a moment to build the ideal world. And I think the difference is that though many of the other ideologies that have done this, whether it's the Taliban, or the Bolsheviks, have actually been held accountable for the crimes that have been required to build their model states. And what I'm trying to do with the book is say, what Harold Pinter said when he won the Nobel Prize in 2005. He said, the Cold War had two sides, and we have actually gone through a collective process of reckoning with the crimes of one side, but we haven't with the other side. So that's why, the book, we have talked about, Iraq and the tsunami and New Orleans, but the book, about 3/4 of the book is a book of modern history, from the first laboratory for these Chicago school ideas, which was Chile under Pinochet with the Chicago Boys, and going through Russia, Tiananmen Square, and I'm telling this history, but with the shocks and the crises left in. Alan Greenspan just published a book where he looks at many of the same chapters, talks, Russia and the Asian financial crisis, and China, but he leaves the shocks out. He leaves the crises out that were so integral to the advancement of this free market crusade. So all I'm trying to do with the book is put them back in, so that this ideology is actually held accountable for its crimes in the same way that other ideologies are.
I yield to no one in my dislike for a lot of the Chicago school economics, but one of the things that it'd be helpful to have you kind of sort through is just looking broadly at the sweep of the Chicago school and its influence on a lot of these events. When Milton Friedman wasn't somebody who was out to make a profit. He was a guy who had an idea. Where does this intersection between ideas and the profit motive happen, and when are you able to, and how do you disentangle it? I mean, yeah. I think that this is actually an important question, and we should look at it not just in the theoretical, but also kind of look at it through the context of a lot of the specific examples in the book. Yeah.
Well, it's very hard to unpack, as I said earlier, because of this problem that the ideology itself is a rationale for unfettered greed. But I think that for many of the Chicago school ideologues, it was this love of the perfect system, which is always enormously seductive.
I hate to tell you, Keynesians. I mean, and it pains me to say it, but you look at the way that a lot of the American welfare state was devised, with the best intentions a lot of times, but also with a perfect model in one's head that ended up not translating so well from the classroom to reality.
Yeah, but you're asking me, whether it's driven by profit or something else. Yeah. And I don't think it's always driven by profit. I think that the love of the system, and I grant you that no belief system is immune from the draw of the perfect system. I mean, we strive for order in the universe, and when there is a system that promises it, and especially something that's so all-encompassing that it claims to be able to explain everything and to solve every problem all at once, like trickle-down economics, it's enormously seductive. And if you happen to be a brilliant mathematician and you can make it all work out, then all the more so. But I think it's very hard to. So I'm not arguing that Milton Friedman was out to make money from these ideas. I think he talks about he talks personally about falling in love with math and wanting to spread that love. I mean, he says that he said that that all of this came out of this love of math, and that he was passing that on to his students. And Arnold Harbinger, who was one of his closest colleagues and was the key figure in training of the Chicago boys, he described the followers of Friedrich von Hayek, the Austrian school at the University of Chicago, as falling in love with the most beautiful picture in the world and loving it so much that anything that affected that beautiful picture wasn't just bad, it was evil. It was evil because it marred the beauty.
Right.
So I think that there's that, okay? But I don't think it's possible to talk about this as just any ideology, because these are not just elegant ideas. They're hugely profitable ideas. I mean, the connection between these ideas and the fact that the employees of Goldman Sachs got $16.5 billion in bonuses, you can draw a pretty straight line. I mean, deregulation, privatization
every ideology
is
has
massively... not all ideologies are profitable. Socialism...
No, but the communist revolution, there was a cadre that came to power that had more power than everybody else in the society.
But this is a uniquely profitable ideology, and so it was supported lavishly by Wall Street. I mean, the ties between the University of Chicago and Wall Street and Milton Friedman's long friendship with Walter Wriston, have been well documented. And the statement that I start the book with, that the change that happens will depend on the ideas that are lying around, that is the mission statement of the right-wing think tank infrastructure in Washington and around the world. These are institutions that are funded with private money from the wealthiest families in this country. This is not an organic intellectual movement in the same way that populism or socialism bubble up from below. This is an intellectual movement that has been coddled and generously funded from on high, which is not to say that each person is out to make it rich, although I do think I show some pretty persuasive examples of the ties between the intellectuals and the military complex, like Richard Pearl and his venture capital firm and so on. But you have a lot of very coddled intellectuals set up in think tanks where they think profitable ideas, and I do refer to them as people paid to think by the makers of tanks, because I think that more and more you have Homeland Security companies and weapons companies actively funding the think tank infrastructure, which is quite disturbing because they're also in a financial gray area where if they were lobbyists, they would have to disclose where their money was coming from. But as think tank denizens, we know almost nothing about where their money is coming from. And we found out that the American Enterprise Institute was getting money from big oil companies to commission papers debunking global warming. Well, what if they're also getting money from weapons companies to create the context of this never-ending war? We need to ask this question.
But just to go back, it seems to me that I can't argue with you about the economics of the think tank world, but I would argue that you look at the people who get hired by think tanks. They have ideologies that they've usually bought into before going into the think tanks. So I mean, the think tanks may play this role, but it doesn't necessarily imply the intellectual dishonesty of the people who occupy them.
No, but this is why I think we'll never really be able to unpack it.
Right. Well, can we just go to some of these specific examples, because one of the things that when you talk about shock therapy and this type of disaster capitalism, a lot of what you don't dwell on a whole lot in this book is what comes before the shock. So before Sachs arrives in Russia, there's communism. Before Hurricane Katrina, there's the city was pretty dysfunctional to begin with. Before Iraq, there was Saddam Hussein. So you're dealing with the impulse to shock isn't something that's purely dreamed up in order to produce profit. And I'm not denying that there's no profit motive there, but some of these people are kind of reform-minded people who have an ideology that they sincerely think works best for the world, and there's no arguing with the fact that a lot of these places,
Yeah, absolutely. But before Sachs arrives in Russia, there wasn't communism. There was Gorbachev, and there was perestroika and glasnost, and there was the beginning of a gradual transition and an opening up, and the beginning of and the birth of a new democracy, a fragile new democracy in that context.